So I recently got back from the Food the Main Course conference, which is a GI focused nutrition conference that is designed and put on by the University of Michigan every August. I went last year for the first time and I loved the conference. I loved it so much that I was like, I have to go back next year. So I went again. I was not disappointed. Oh my gosh, these folks know how to put on a conference. And I will say, it's really cool how they design it. I've never been to a conference quite like this one where you don't choose tracks. Everybody stays together the whole time. And they kind of divide up a topic, and a topic will have 2 to 3 speakers. Typically, the first speaker is the MD, who will give the medical perspective. And then there's follow up by a dietitian who's doing all of the practical clinical application that we do as nutrition professionals. So I actually think this is a fantastic conference for anybody who works in GI or works maybe at the intersection of GI like I do with eating disorders, but not only for nutrition professionals. I think it's great for other allied professionals. But I do want to say specifically for dietitians, if you are looking for an excellent live conference and have an interest in GI, this is certainly one for you to check out. And one of the things that was really interesting and really unexpected this year is that there was a theme that arose during the conference. And it was a little bit disappointing to me, which I want to talk about. And I will say, I'm glad that it's becoming more front and center. So when I look at the literature that is speaking about particularly GI and eating disorders, which is, as many of you know, is something I have spoken about for years and something that I care a lot about because the majority of my clients with an eating disorder also have some sort of GI, either complaint or condition that we're co-managing. But one of the things that I will say is that I'm really noticing in the gastrointestinal literature, often the authors are doing a really, really nice job of a couple of things where they will say, be sure to screen for an eating disorder, that they are really acknowledging the high co-occurrence in this population, that folks with GI disorders are at a high risk of developing an eating disorder. And then we also see it on the flip side, that folks with eating disorders have high incidence of co-occurring GI conditions. So I feel like the GI folks are really doing some nice work, particularly the past handful of years of acknowledging this. And so they're doing a nice job of saying, hey, we've got to screen and refer out. And then the other thing that I'm hearing really consistently from the GI folks is a really positive food message, which is we want to support as liberal of a diet as possible. That sometimes, of course, there are foods that either need to be eliminated or modified in some way, but that the goal is to have as flexible and inclusive as a diet pattern as possible. So I think that they're doing such a nice job with this messaging in a way that's going to land pretty well for an eating disorders audience. But the question that arose for me last year as I was an attendee is that I was like, I hear this recommendation and I'm wondering how many GI professionals feel comfortable and feel able to screen for an eating disorder. And then if they feel comfortable and willing to screen for an eating disorder, do they have a sense of how and where to refer out? And I never got to ask that specific question last year, but it came up again this year. And I was able to actually ask the question. And what I heard didn't really surprise me is that, one, there are no clinical assessment tools that have been validated to screen for GI disorders within the eating disorder population. And flip that, there are no validated tools specifically to screen for an eating disorder within the GI population. And this is really important because what this means is that you can accidentally flag an eating disorder when it's not really an eating disorder. It's actually all related to the GI disorder. And so you really want to get clear about what is it that we are properly screening and assessing and treating for and getting folks to the right experts. And so I think something that is maybe possibly getting in the way or a barrier for certain GI professionals is I don't feel like they have a reliable tool to help with the screening process, nor do folks feel a whole lot of confidence that they not only know how to accurately assess for an eating disorder, but then this next step is that they aren't feeling confident or like they know where to send these folks. And so what's happening, I think probably for many, if not most, individuals who are being seen at a GI clinic is that there isn't a screening or assessment process and then a referral process if there is a co-occurring eating disorder condition. And what I heard a couple of times through the weekend was, well, we just don't really know what to do with these individuals, so it's probably best that we just don't screen at all. And that stopped me in my tracks because obviously I'm very biased as somebody who spends all of my professional time among phenomenal eating disorder professionals. I wanted to like jump up and be like, we are here. Like, we love to collaborate. Um, let's not stop there. Let's not stop the conversation at not only do we not have standardized screening tools yet, but we don't know where to send them. That I really hope that there can be some building that happens from what kind of arose, at least for me, and I know speaking with some of my other eating disorder colleagues there at the conference, that let's not stop there. How do we take the conversation then to the next place? Because there are some, I actually think, really beautiful parallels that I see between GI and eating disorders. The standard of care in GI is a multidisciplinary team. You've got medical, you've got nutrition, and you have behavioral health or the mental health side of things. And it's the exact same in eating disorders. So I actually see a future in which we are referring to one another. We are doing some screening and assessing, and that, in my opinion, in the best of both worlds, we're building a collaboration where we aren't at odds with one another in terms of our goals, that we can really bring our unique skill sets and come together to best support these patients who are typically really, really deeply suffering and really suffering with some really complicated symptoms and conditions. It was really interesting. There was a talk, and the talk by this particular doctor wasn't a gastroenterologist. He actually come from the field of what I will sort of use scare quotes, obesity medicine. And he gave a talk on Ozempic, and he really conveyed his uncertainty of, colleagues that he's speaking with in terms of, you know, given the overlap of folks with disordered eating and eating disorders, should we really be screening all of these patients who are seeking out a GLP-1? And of course, his talk was within the context of GI side effects of GLP-1s. And I was so heartened to see so many of us in the audience were like, yes, yes, that is the ethical thing to do. But when I really took home, it sort of from my lens was something that isn't totally new to me, but was kind of reiterated, is that typically folks who don't specialize in eating disorders but work in other areas but understand there's this overlap, is that individuals tend to really not have a confidence I don't know that I want to say it's a willingness. Often it comes from this place, a kind of a fear-based place or an anxiety-based place, where there just is not this confidence to screen and work with folks with eating disorders. And so it kind of just gets pushed to the side, kind of buried, ignored. And to me, that is like the worst possible outcome. Yeah. And so I really hope that those of you who care about this topic, feel free to, send your thoughts. I think that there's perhaps some opportunities here over the next few years to build something that so much of my work has been wanting to help other professionals feel more confident in working with this population, even if it's just more confident screening and assessing. Maybe they don't want to develop the specialization and don't necessarily want to provide ongoing nutrition counseling or medical care. But I do think that we can help individuals feel less reluctance, maybe a little less trepidation, anxiety, to bringing the eating disorder conversation into the room. And of course, it's incredibly nuanced. There's a lot of complexity. Folks with eating disorders, some of whom either don't know that they have an eating disorder, aren't acknowledging the problem as an eating disorder, aren't wanting to work on it or think through the lens of an eating disorder. And of course, obviously, the folks that I tend to work with are very much aware that they have an eating disorder and that it's part of what we're working on all together. But I'm glad that this conversation is a little bit more front and center in these in these other professional circles. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to build and grow, and particularly at this intersection between GI disorders and eating disorders, which I feel so passionate about. So that's my very short kind of high level take home from the conference. I know I'm not getting into the nitty gritty of all the various talks, but that was the kind of like high level, most important piece that I wanted to do a little reflecting on. So thanks for being here with me. Take care.